I love seeing those pictures. We're in this series, The Heart of Advent, and we're taking a look at what's been close to our heart all along as a church, what's really been in our DNA. And we've taken a look at being a church that cares for those who are not here yet. We've talked about evangelism and what it means to reach out to our community and to care about those empty seats that are around us and the people that those represent. And we've talked about being a church that cares for our next generation, for our children and student ministry. And that's so close to our heart, such an incredible part of who we are as a congregation. And then last week, Pastor Greg talked to us about being a church that serves, that has served the community, that's gone out of our doors and chosen that again and again and again. It's really incredible to think about what kind of a church we are. And to be able to celebrate that and then to take a look at the scripture and figure out why it is that we're that kind of a church. And what is that going to look like in the future as we move into the future that God is calling us into. I want to pray with you today, and then we're going to dive into the scripture together, okay? Let's pray. God, as we open your word today, I pray that you would help it to make sense to us. That it would grab us. It would grab our hearts and our minds. And Father, I pray that you help us to live these words out. We pray all of this in your holy name. Amen. Well, one of the things that I noticed early on about us as a congregation is that this is a church that's willing to try some things. We're willing to take a bit of a risk. And that makes some of us uncomfortable, the idea of risk-taking and trying new things. When Cammie and I were first getting to know each other, this was back in the 90s, and coffee shops were just kind of becoming the thing, right? We all watched that show Friends. Some of you know, you remember that far back. And we watched that show, and they all had great lives around a coffee shop, and we thought we should hang out in coffee shops, then our lives would be great. And so we started going to coffee shops. And at one point, early on, like the first time Cammie went, she ordered, I think it was a medium vanilla latte. And it was good. It was really good. And so we would go again. We came back the next time. She ordered a medium vanilla latte. And then third time she ordered a medium vanilla latte. In fact, she ordered the same drink for over a year. And then it went on. It was like 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. Cammie's ordering exactly the same drink. I'm looking at this. I mean, there's so many different types of coffee. There's so many options. I had to work up some courage. It took a few years, but I worked up the courage. And I said, Cammie, maybe you want to try maybe something else. She was like, Kaz, these drinks cost almost $3. Remember, this is the 90s. So they cost almost $3. And I know I like this one. I just don't think it's worth the risk. And I feel her pain a little bit, you know, but I want to be, no, we've got to try new things. We've got to risk. We've got to step out there. And I like to think of myself as a risk taker when it comes to coffee. But that's sort of where I often draw the line. In fact, when I was a little kid, I was always very, very competitive. I always wanted to win. I wanted to win so badly that if I didn't win, I would throw huge fits. And my parents went to see a parenting expert. And they said, what do we do with this kid? He's throwing fits if he doesn't win anything. And they said, you have to play games with him and make him lose. And so all of my early memories of board games, some of you have great memories of playing board games with your families. Mine were of my dad beating me one more time at Candyland and then rubbing it in. I don't think they said you had to gloat over it, but he just beat me again and again and again. What happened to me is that as I got older, I began to realize that I have this thing in me that if I'm not going to win, I won't even play the game. Like, I'm not even going to start if I don't know that I'm competent in this, and I don't know that I'm a pretty good chance I'm going to win. If it feels like I'm not winning, no way. I'm not playing that. Too risky. Well, this church has been a church that said, let's try some stuff. Let's just figure it out. Let's take a risk. And you're a congregation that Pastor Dave got you together and said, let's start a new church. And some of you said, okay, that'll probably be easy. Maybe not, but we're going to try. And you just started a church from scratch. And then over the years, you began to build on and add on and put together new things. You started new programs, things for kids and things for youth ministry. And those were all changes, and you risked them, and you stepped into them. It was kind of amazing. And at some point, as a congregation, you looked at this little country road out here with all the trees that were just out here, way out in the boonies. Did you know this was the boonies? This was the boonies. Way out here on this little country road. And somebody said, you know what, we should build a building over there. We should build a church building over there. You know, that was a risk. And there you built a church building, and then somebody said, well, let's build another building. Let's add on. In fact, 6 times over the course of the history, you've said, let's add on, let's grow, let's expand, let's risk. And over the years, there have been different challenges have risen up and different opportunities and different callings. And you've said, let's go after those. Let's take the risk. Let's step into it. You know, there was one point where somebody looked around and said, you know what, we need another worship service. And so you went from 1 worship service to 2 worship services. Now, for some of you, that's like, you know, no big deal, right? But you're sitting here after years and years of doing this. When there was only 1 and we said, hey, let's go to 2, people got nervous. What if I don't see my friends, right? What if they have better coffee at the first service? The early service is better coffee. I hear that. But what if it felt risky, but you did it. In fact, over the course of this life of this church, there have been times when there have been 3 worship services. I mean, all kinds of things like that. Sometime, some way back, 25 years ago, somebody said, you know what? We should not just have traditional worship service. We should also have a contemporary service. And they brought drums into the church building. That felt risky. But this was a church that was willing to do it. I love that about us. In fact, one of the big risks that we took as a church was there was a church in Arlington that needed some help. And we decided we're gonna take that on as another campus so that we would become a church with 2 campuses. And this morning, the sermon, and we're sharing it both here and in Arlington. We're all together on this morning. If you don't know that, that's a risk technologically, okay? There's all kind of technology to make that happen. But it's kind of a fun morning, exciting morning to do this. And I went out earlier this week to meet with Pastor Don and just kind of go through that story. And I want you to watch it today.
One of the biggest risks that we've ever taken as a church is to take on a second campus in Arlington. And so for those of you on the Cordova campus, some of you may have never even been out here. So today we want to take a little bit of time on the Arlington campus and to talk to Don, who really led this thing from the beginning. Don, I just wanted to hear a little bit of the story. Tell us, how did this start? What were some of those conversations like when you said, all right, this church is going to become part of Advent?
So the conversation had started long before I was even here. It really sprung out of Dave Schieber's vision of mirroring what he had experienced at Advent. When he went there to Germantown Road, there weren't many people. It was the edge of development for Shelby County, and God had called him to plant a church.
So, but this was an existing congregation. I mean, this place isn't new. It's been around. I mean, how did that go? How do we go, guys? I want you to take a risk and consider joining us.
Yes, that had actually happened before I arrived as well, because Arlington Presbyterian Church, they'd been here for 99 years, and even though the community of Arlington began to grow and it had doubled in size there from 2000 to 2008, when this all happened, the church was struggling. And they started talking to Dave and Chris and the people at Advent. What are you all doing that you're growing and reaching young families, reaching the community for Christ? We want to learn from you. And out of those conversations came this idea, why don't we partner together? Why don't we just join together and start a new campus, a new church here in Arlington area probably, and are you willing to do that?
Yeah.
And so for those folks, they were posed with a huge risk.
I mean, it's scary. I mean, I can't even imagine what those conversations had to be like.
I asked the people at Advent to speak with the Arlington Presbyterian Church members and leaders and to tell them, hey, you want to do this, we need to know that you are all in. Just like Christ asked people to be willing to leave their boats, leave their families, and follow Jesus, that they were asked that same thing. They were asked to risk. The worship's going to look different. You may not be in the same sort of leadership roles you are now. You may not even be worshiping in the same building that you've been at and your family's been at for generations.
I read that somewhere, I think when I was here on an interview, maybe there's an article that's framed somewhere around here, and I read this article in the paper, and it said, it said that you had talked to this group and said, this might not even be the right building. And sitting here in this beautiful building, I'm just trying to imagine myself in those shoes and being like, okay, well, if that's what it is, if that's what it means to reach this community for Christ, we're even willing to give that up.
For those at Advent Cordova that became a part of Advent Arlington, it was a big risk. I remember I was asked to preach my first sermon shortly after I arrived before all of Advent Presbyterian Church, and to basically challenge people, are you willing to be a part of what God's going to do as we start a new campus, probably in Arlington or somewhere on the edge of Shelby County? And I shared in the sermon, I spoke about, you may not know this, but I used to be on the parachute team for the Air Force. And I told some stories about parachuting and the...
It's going to be like parachuting.
Yeah, it's like a big risk. You step out of that door and you're in free fall, and But I challenged the people in that sermon, are you willing to give up everything, to go into something new, to take this leap of faith, the step of faith for Christ, to try to share the gospel in a new community with new people? We had at least a dozen or more families that came up and said, hey, we want to be a part of it. Yeah, hand me my parachute.
Wow, so cool. So tell us a little bit of the fruit. I mean, so now we've been at this for years now, and it's this has been a thriving thing, even though not always easy, it's been thriving.
Yeah, absolutely. God has worked and blessed us for taking the risks that we've taken. Over the course of these 12 plus years now, we have seen just a lot of fruit in people coming to Christ. We've had lots of people that weren't in church or hadn't been for decades that came back, and we've baptized families. I've seen a lot of spiritual growth. We have over 100 students in our preschool, which is a ministry and mission to the community. To me, one of the greatest testimonies to what God has done here at Advent Arlington Church came from Lyle Conley, whose parents and grandparents and great-grandparents have been a part of Arlington Presbyterian Church before we did this. She was very reluctant about this, but took that risk. And she said how she had seen God bring new life, that there was a resurrection here. And for her to look out and see the church full of people, full of children, and the gospel being preached, and the service we do in this community, how good that made her feel to have seen the Spirit at work.
Well, hey, Don, I just want to say thanks for letting us, as we kind of sit here in this building and remember these stories. I'm just so grateful for the journey that God has brought us on as a whole church. And so thanks for doing this with us and reminding us of God's blessings here.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Advent, for taking this risk.
Yeah.
I love that story. I love that we're a church that's willing to reach out and take risks. That's kind of who we are. It's deep in our DNA. And today I wanted to look at that biblically. Where does that come from? Why is that such a deeply held value? It really goes back to following God's call, that we believe in God's call. The passage we're going to look at today comes from John chapter 21. And it's an interaction between Jesus and Peter. And this happens after the resurrection. So there's been, they've gone to the cross and then the resurrection. Jesus has appeared. They know about the resurrection, but there's still uneasiness with, is it real? And what does that even mean? We're going to pick up in John chapter 21, and we'll start in verse 3. You can follow along on the screens or grab your Bible. Verse 3. I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter told them. And they said, we'll go with you. So they went out and got into the boat. But that night, they caught nothing. Now, he's talking to the disciples. And this is after the resurrection. And this is Peter's decision. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go fish. That line's important, so hang on to that as we read the rest of this story. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore. But the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" "No," they answered. And he said, "Throw your nets on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." And when they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and he jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. I love the New Testament writers as they write with detail and description. This is a story that happened. So he's telling you, look, he had to wrap his cloak around him, and they were about 100 yards off. And in a minute, he's going to get the exact number of fish, because it matters when you're a fisherman how many fish you caught, okay? About 100 yards, verse 9. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. And Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you have just caught." So Simon Peter climbed into the boat and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153. But even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and he took the bread and he gave it to them. And he did the same with the fish. This was now the third time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And he answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Feed my sheep. Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." Guys, there's a lot happening in this passage, and I want us just to walk through it for a minute, and we need to know some of the context. It starts off with Peter saying, "I'm going to go fishing." Now, you got to understand who Peter is. You see, that's not just any pastime. Peter wasn't saying, "Hey, I just need some rest and relaxation, so I'm going to get out of here and go fishing." That's not it at all. Peter was a fisherman. That was his income. That was his job. In fact, when Jesus met him and called him, he was out fishing. It was the family business. It's how he took care of his family. It had been a family business. It was generational often in that time, and Peter's comfort zone was fishing. So what was Peter saying? He was saying, "Hey, I'm going back to where I know things will be okay. I'm going back to where I can take care of things." Peter needed a place where there wasn't any chaos, because chaos was all around him at that moment. You see, just within the last week, Jesus met with them and had a meal with them. They shared a meal around the table on that Thursday night. It was the Seder meal, and as they were sharing the meal, Jesus got up and he began to wash people's feet. And he got to Peter and he went to wash Peter's feet. And Peter said, "You're not going to wash my feet." And Jesus told him, "Unless I wash your feet, you have nothing to do with me." So then Peter, because he's Peter's an all-in kind of guy. He doesn't want to go a little bit. He wants to go all the way. So Peter responds to Jesus. He says, "Well, then don't just wash my feet. Wash my whole body." Peter goes on to talk with Jesus about how all in he is, how he'll follow Jesus no matter what, no matter where. He's in. He's 100% in. And it was in that conversation that Jesus looks at him and says, before the rooster crows, you're going to deny me 3 times. Peter thought, there's no way I would do that. But sure enough, as Jesus goes to trial later on, and as he's headed towards the cross, Peter finds himself denying Jesus 3 times. He couldn't imagine that. I mean, he never would have thought that would happen. He's the all-in guy. He was broken, and he was scared, and he wasn't sure, and he was on unsure footing. He wasn't sure they were going to win or how this was going to go down, and so he denies him 3 times. One of those times, we're told he's standing right next to a charcoal fire. That's sort of an unusual detail. But when we pick it back up in John 21, when Jesus comes out to meet the disciples after the resurrection, it says he makes a charcoal fire. It's just this little reminder connecting those 2 stories, connecting the stories for Peter. Peter now finds himself in turmoil, and in the process of this, he watches Jesus go to the cross. He watches him die. What's going to happen now? All our hope was placed in Jesus, and all our hope was in him being our Savior, and he goes to the cross and then to the grave. He actually dies, and they were in complete turmoil. By the time we get to this story, we've heard there's resurrection. And for us, we look at that and we go, well, it's resurrection. All things are new. Everything should be good. You should be excited, Peter. But for them, they still weren't sure what that meant. It was all a little bit uneasy. They didn't know really how resurrection would impact them or what would happen with this. They weren't sure what the next steps were. And for many cases, Jesus had to keep coming back because they weren't even really sure this resurrection thing was real. And so Peter, in the midst of all that chaos, in the midst of all the brokenness and all the disappointment, he says, I'm going fishing. He's not escaping he's not just resting and going on vacation. He's going back to work. He's going back to where he can be in control. And it's in that scene, it's in that place that Jesus shows up, charcoal fire and all. And Jesus calls out to them, have you caught any fish? Now, I'm not a fisherman, but I would imagine if I was catching fish, that would be a great question. I would love to answer that. But on a night where I'd caught nothing all night long, I do not want to hear that question, right? Nothing. We've got nothing. Jesus says, throw your net on the other side. But there's an echo here of a story back from the beginning of Peter's call. See, Peter was fishing when Jesus comes out and begins to speak to him, and Jesus calls him. He says, follow me. Peter, the fisherman, he says to Peter, follow me, and I will make you a fisher of men. See, Jesus is taking Peter back to his calling. He's reminding him of back when he got into this in the first place, where he started being a disciple of Jesus, where he heard the clear call of Jesus and decided to put his life in that direction, to follow Jesus no matter where he was going to go. He reminded him of that calling. And then Jesus does something really cool. He asks him 3 questions. You see, those 3 questions mirror the 3 times that Peter denies Jesus. Do you love me? You know I love you. Jesus extends grace in this moment to Peter. 3 times over, he gives him grace. But it's not just grace. It's not just this sense of forgiveness. It's not just a sense of, I'm still with you. But then he takes Peter and he turns him around and he points him into mission. He doesn't just say, Peter, you're forgiven. I love you. It's all okay. He doesn't give him a big hug. He asks the question. When Peter responds, he says, then feed my sheep. Feed my lambs, feed my sheep. What does he do with Peter? He reminds him of the calling. He goes, you had a calling. It's not just grace that you're forgiven, but out of this place of being forgiven, you live into the calling that you've been given. You're to be a fisherman, but a fisher of men. And so there he stands with Peter, reminding him of this calling, of this mission. And I'm sure for Peter at some moment, it had to start clicking in. He had to start remembering. He had to remember that when he was called, he stepped out of a family business. He stepped out of a place of comfort. He stepped out of a zone where he knew what he was doing, but he stepped into something even greater. And in this process of following Jesus, he got to be part of what Jesus was doing, bringing his kingdom from up there down here, changing the world and changing lives, and Peter got to see it. And he also had to remember the times that in the middle of this calling, which felt so risky, where he didn't know how things were going to go, that even there in that place, well, Jesus took care of him. Peter must have remembered the time where he was in a boat and Jesus came walking out on the water. And Jesus says, "Come on out." Peter says, "If it's you, I'll come." And Jesus says, "Come on out." Peter actually gets out of the boat and he steps on water. He puts his weight down on water and he's able to walk on water. This is an amazing thing. That God was faithful in the calling. The God that called him enabled him to walk on water when he put his weight down on it. That's incredible. And then when he lost his focus on Jesus and he began to sink, well, that's when Jesus reached out his arm and grabbed him. He saved him. He took care of him. You see, in the midst of that calling, in the midst of that risky place, God watched out for him. God was faithful in the calling, and God was faithful in giving him a mission, and God was faithful in saving him. There was that time, not that long before this moment, where they came to arrest Jesus. Peter pulls out a sword, cuts off an ear. I mean, think of what could have happened. That could have started. Peter should have gone right off. He could have been executed right there on the spot. It was in that moment that Jesus picks up the ear. He heals him. Jesus saves him and watches out for him and protects him. Peter must have been remembering that when he was faithful to the call, that when he stepped out in the risk, when he went the direction that God was calling him, that God would be faithful. And then we get to this interesting part of the passage. Henry Nouwen is a priest and a writer, and he writes about this passage, about this little part of it that I always just read right past. I'm grateful to him for kind of making us stop and sit and wait and kind of think about this for a minute. This is in verse 18. I want you just to listen to this carefully, what happens here. Verse 18. They're going back and forth with the exchange. Jesus says, "Feed my sheep." And then it just sounds kind of weird. "Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and you went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." Jesus looks at Peter. He starts to talk to him about wisdom. When you're a young man, you went every direction you want to go. But as you've become wise and you begin to live into your calling, it looks a little different than you originally thought. It looks like holding out your hands, not dressing yourself, but somebody else dressing you. Now, guys, I don't know how you feel about that. That makes me feel a little uneasy. I don't like the thought of somebody else having to dress me. When Whit, my oldest, when he was in the 6th grade, middle schooler, he somehow was riding his bike to school. We still don't know the story of what happened. All I know is I got a phone call. He was laying on the side of the road. He ended up with 2 broken arms. And there was a point where he had like a sling and a cast and whatever, and he was like this. He could not move one bit. He couldn't eat. We kind of had fun with it. We would put the food down in front of him and watch him try to struggle to get your arm up without being able to. He had nothing. Guess what? I had to help him get dressed in 6th grade. You think that's awkward? So that's not easy. He did not like those moments. Jesus looks at Peter and he says, as you become wise, as you really began to live into the person that God, I am calling you to be. It's a little different. You don't dress yourself and go where you want to go. It's where you hold your hands out. Someone else dresses you, and someone else leads you where you do not want to go. But it's in that place of risk, that place of following the calling, that you find God's faithfulness. You see, that wasn't the end of the story for Peter. This wasn't wrapping up Peter's life. This was Jesus telling Peter he's going to go out, and his calling is just now starting. But it has to be the kind of calling of submission. He's going to be the kind of leader who submits and says, God, take me anywhere. And I think it takes this perspective that Peter had. You see, because Peter, at this point, begins to be able to hear this. He can hear it because he knows about God's grace. Even in the mess, even in the brokenness, even when he denies Jesus, God still shows up and gives him grace. And he knows about the God who saves. Even when he cuts off an ear or when he starts sinking in the water, God picks him up out of the water and puts the ear back on. It's a place where you can rest in the faithfulness of God. He knows that when he took those first steps, when Jesus called him from being a fisherman to being a disciple, and he took the step, he said, all right, I'll go, I'll follow, I'll leave the family business. And he took the first little step, and God was faithful. And he took another little step, and God was faithful. And as he looks back, he sees God's faithfulness all through his life. And then he can hear these words: hold your hands out and be dressed. Be led to places you do not want to go. And then God uses Peter to change the world. I mean, Peter then goes on to begin to start churches and plant churches and see the community be impacted. And the reason that we're here today is because Peter could hear this story and Peter could take that risk. When I was in college, my dad called me. He was a pastor, and he said, there's this pastor's conference that's going on in Atlanta, and I want you to come down and join me down there. And so we said, okay. I went down, I met my dad there, and we heard all kinds of just incredible pastors and preachers. And we heard a guy named Max Lucado. Some of you know Max Lucado. He's written a bunch of things. And Max Lucado preached the most eloquent sermon I've ever heard. The guy is a wordsmith, a genius. It was brilliant and beautiful. I still remember it all these years later. It was called The Good Ship Church. And it was powerful. Now, I heard this other pastor named Tony Evans. And some of you would be familiar with Tony Evans on the radio or other things. And man, a powerful, incredible preacher. And he preached this sermon. And here I was a college kid. I mean, this is a long time ago. And I still remember he preached this sermon. Same old clergy day, same old clergy way. And I still remember that. It was amazing. But the thing that struck me the most was this guy who was sort of monotone with a nasally, whiny voice. Not exciting. His name was Jack Hayward. He was a pastor from California. And Jack Hayward got up and began to talk about what it means to follow God's call. And he'd given his whole life to following God's call. And he started talking about how God spoke to him. I just gave him this image. He said the image was of a baby, just a little baby, a little toddler, just learning to walk or run. And that toddler holding his arms out, eyes closed, and then running at full speed. And as Jack Hayward spoke about this, he was just standing there and he was doing it, right? He was eyes closed like this, and he started running on stage. It was so awkward. I still feel sorry for him. I mean, we're just watching it. It looked all weird. But it's burned in my heart and in my soul as later I began to take on this understanding of what he was talking about. You see, this image of following God is one of where you risk. It's one of where you put your hands out, your eyes closed, and you start to run. Now, you and I know if you were to run with your eyes closed and your hands out, you're going to have a problem, right? I mean, you're going to fall. And when you fall, you're not going to be able to break the fall. You're going to hit a wall. You're going to hit anything. I mean, I can't imagine doing that. And yet, this is the calling that God has for each one of us. And this is the calling that God has for us as a church. Guys, I see all kind of faults when I look at myself and I go, man, for me as a dad, I go, oh, I mean, I want to be just a great dad, but there are all kind of places where I'm just not sure. Where I don't know exactly the next right step or the next right move, or I can't seem to quite control it and make things happen the way I want it to happen, or the kids to turn out exactly the way I think they should turn out, or I'm just unsure. There are all kind of places as a pastor where I think I know, but I'm not sure, and which way should we go, and what should we do? And I don't know. I only know one thing. I'm going to be a pastor that follows God. I'm going to be a dad that follows God. I might not get it all right. I might not have everything in the right step, but I will close my eyes, hold my hands out, listen for that call, and run in that direction. That's all I know how to do. In fact, that's true for all of us. That's what God is calling all of us to do, not to be experts. You don't have to get it all right. What you have to do is follow in God's call. Peter messed it up worse than any one of us, and yet he was willing to follow, even after he gave up, and he goes, well, I'm going fishing. Jesus shows back up and says, hey, you're forgiven. I love you. Now here's your calling. Here's the direction you need to run. Here's your mission. Jesus puts him back on mission. And that's the kind of church that we're called to be. I want to ask you to join with me in this, that we would be a church, that we would be people who in our lives, we live lives not as experts, but as people willing to close our eyes, hold our hands out, look a little bit ridiculous, and run in the direction that God calls us to run. I'm going to pray for us today. Father, make us your people. Speak clearly to us. Help us to know the direction you want us to go every day with our families and as a church. God, give us the courage and passion to run when we hear your voice. We pray all of this in your holy name. Amen.